Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Now, there's been a rally that's been held in Islamabad about the killing of 11 Hindu Pakistanis who died in India, in fact, in the district of Jodhpur in Rajasthan there in that country. These were farmers, and they've died in mysterious conditions, as described by their own family members, in fact. One of the daughters or the female members of the family, Srimati Mukhi, has made quite concerning statements, possibly about the involvement of Indian intelligence in all of this. Now, the backstory and the behind-the-scenes story seemingly is that India had tried to recruit some family members, at the very least, into saying anti-Pakistan rhetoric, and they refused. Now, that at least is what has come out. And a lot of people are speculating because the Indian government has not spoken clearly about what has happened. This incident happened back on August the 9th, so a significant amount of time has passed since then, and you would think that by now there should be some clarity exactly as to what has occurred, and therefore the Hindu community in Pakistan too is concerned. This rally was then called for in front of the Indian High Commission. A letter has also been posted at the Indian High Commission demanding that the Indians answer specifically what has happened to these 11 Pakistani Hindus, as I said. Let's discuss that a bit further. We're now joined by Dewan Sachal, who is a politician. He's an MPA PTI Sindh. He's joining us today. Also joining us is Ramesh Singh Arora, who is a MPA Punjab Assembly. Ramesh and Dewan, thank you both for your time today and for joining us here in Scope. Dewan, let me start with you. How concerning are the details of this incident, right? Because it's odd, isn't it, that since August 9th, there haven't been any details, or not enough details at the very least, coming out to even the family members that they would be concerned enough.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. This thing, like you yourself pointed out, this thing happened on 9th of August or 8th of August in Jodhpur in India. And that was the day some newspapers had published it. I even tweeted on it on that exact day. Or even the Pakistani media took it up enough to ask the Indian High Commission to come there to find out and to ask for the details. This thing only started like a few days back in Pakistan, that it's become big, it's gone viral on social media, while this should have been done at least 1.5 months back when it actually happened. Now, the details that I read at that time, and I made a few phone calls, I did things on my own. Unfortunately, I'm obviously not that big to find out everything on my own. The details were that the first news that came in was that they committed suicide. The next day it came out that they had some personal enmity and they got murdered because of that. And then finally it came out that the Indian intelligence agency, RAW, has done that. I really don't know what the details are, but whatever the details are, the Indian government owes it to us, to the Pakistan government, to tell us the truth about this problem. And they owe it to us as the international community, because these were Pakistanis who were living there.
Indeed.
Yes, they had probably applied for asylum or something. Again, see, these are the details we don't really have. And had the government of Pakistan, though it's my own government, I am a PTI legislator from Sindh, but had our own government taken this issue up in a big way in the second week of August, when it did happen on the 8th or 9th of August, we would have had some details by now.
Okay, so if I may come in, Dewan, I wanted to bring in Ramesh to the conversation, and your points are completely valid. But Ramesh, I also wanted to bring you in and ask you, Ramesh, about how concerned you are as well about what has occurred and about the lack of details, even as Dewan clearly pointed out.
Thank you very much for taking on the call, particularly on this very important issue. A tragic incident happened in India. Look, our Pakistani Hindus who were in India, who were on a visit in India almost a month back, 11 of them, they were assassinated, they were killed by the RSS people who are instigating, particularly who are against the Pakistan, from whom the minorities are not safe in India. So we really condemn, and the whole of the Pakistani nation, right now they are standing with their Hindu community living in Pakistan, and we are part of their sorrow, we are part of their whatever has happened with them, so we are with them. So India, who always claimed that India is a secular state, and they always claim at every platform and always blame the Pakistan, that the minorities living in Pakistan, they are not safe, their worship places, they are not safeguarded. But in reality, if you see, their minds are poisoned. All the time they are anti-Pakistan. So they are anti-Pakistan means they are anti-Muslims, they are anti-Sikhs, they are anti-Hindus who are living in Pakistan. So whatever has happened, it has clearly opened the policy of India that no one is safe in India, and the Sikhs, they are suffering, Muslims, they are suffering. So you can see what is happening in Kashmir. Kashmiri people, they are fighting, they are struggling for their independence for so many years. And so I really condemn this incident, whatever has happened in India.
Okay, so Dewan, when we're talking about the details of this incident, as you of course laid out, there are a number of course theories, and these are only theories at this point because we don't have any verified facts coming out ever since this incident. One would imagine that the Indian side may say to the Pakistanis, "Listen, we'll give the details to the family," but even that has not happened, right? I mean, that strikes one as odd, doesn't it? That even the family does not know what has happened.
I think there's one lady who's a family member in Pakistan, but more than that, there was one family member who actually survived this incident, a son-in-law or something of the main guy and the other 7 members of the family, the 8 members of the family who passed. There was a son-in-law who actually survived this attack. Again, this is all what I read in the newspapers. I don't have any first-hand knowledge of anything. I think that guy should be given access to the Pakistan consulate. He should be called by the Pakistan embassy in Delhi because he's a Pakistani after all. And maybe we can, the media channels and the foreign minister should have a chat with him, and we should find out the detail because he's the person who was there at that time. And he's the person we would actually believe because he's the Pakistani amongst all of them. So that person should be called to the embassy in Delhi at least, if not back to Pakistan, and maybe we can find out some details. I agree with Mr. Arora that this is hugely condemnable. My point of the condemning is that at least the report should be there. We should know what's happened. Exactly. Obviously, if the Indian agencies have murdered this family, then they would not tell us the truth. But let's see what they tell us first.
Yeah.
If it was a suicide, I don't believe in the suicide theory because 8 members of a family with young kids don't commit suicide. So I don't believe in the suicide theory. Was it a personal revenge murder? I don't know. Was it accidental death? That there was a poisonous gas leak in the house? I don't know. Or was it actual murder? If it was murder, maybe it was. I mean, what the Indians are doing in Kashmir, like Mr. Arora very rightly pointed out. I mean, what we have seen in Kashmir, what we have seen in the other Indian states like Arunachal Pradesh and others, where they are killing Christians, where they are killing Muslims. Even the Indian Hindus who are not of the Brahmin caste are not safe from these RSS goons right now. So India has no respect for life. They have no respect for anyone but their own ideology, which is obviously wrong. So I think the Indian government is definitely one of the worst. They are basically following what the fascist government in the times of Nazi Germany were doing, or what the Italian under Mussolini were doing. So Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Modi, they are all of the same kind, and they have no respect for anyone but themselves. But we need to find out the facts.
I'm just going to give the final word to Ramesh before letting both of you go. Ramesh, what are your hopes for transparency in this case? Of course, the pressure now, as the Dewan said, is finally now being put on the Indians to release the facts about this. Do you think that will happen?
Look, if you ask about the hope from my side, particularly keeping with the history of India, honestly speaking, I don't have any hope that something would come from Indian side because history speaks for itself. What happened with the Sikhs in 1984? There's a Sikh genocide, and the Sikh nation is still struggling for the justice. And we didn't get any justice from the India. What has happened with the Kashmir? They're struggling for their independence. Nothing came out of it. What has happened with the Christians? My brother was talking about like this. So what has happened with the Christians? What has happened with the Dalits? So, but keeping in all these all these things, I still request Mr. Modi, please come forward and play your role. investigate the matter. What has happened with these Pakistani Hindus? Why they are killed? What is the mindset? Why RSS is doing this? Because right now, this is my personal feeling, my personal opinion, that not personal, because if you look at the facts, Mr. Modi is a puppet of RSS, and there's a policy of RSS, and that Hinduvata and the superiority of the Hinduvata is prevailing everywhere in India. So-called, they are secular, they claim that we are secular, but if you look at their policy, that policy is against the human being. Yeah. So there is particular, there are not no human rights for the minorities in India. If something goes wrong in Pakistan, a very minor issue, they make it a very big issue and present it to the world that, look, this is happening in Pakistan, the minorities are not safe, their worship places are not safeguarded. But in response, we have opened the Kartarpur corridor, and India is still reluctant to send their devotees to Pakistan. And we are requesting again and again, please send the Sikh Sangha to Pakistan because we have opened the Kartarpur. But look at their mentality. So, but still, I request them, and I hope, although I'm hopeless, but still, I hope that maybe they will come up with a transparent inquiry report and they will tell us what is the reality and what is the actual situation and why those 8 people are killed in India who belong to Pakistan.
Very well. We'll leave there as a word, but we do sincerely appreciate both of our esteemed guests, Dewan and Ramesh, who were speaking to us there respectively from Islamabad, for sharing their thoughts, of course, on this case. Now, at the root of this, we don't actually know what happened, right? It is certainly suspicious to have such a high number of family members committing suicide, quote unquote, if that is what the main narrative from the Indian side is about what's happened in this case. Nevertheless, I mean, it's the right of Pakistan, considering that these were its citizens that were killed, according to many accounts there in Jodhpur in India, in the Rajasthan state, that they need to understand exactly what has happened. The facts need to come out in a transparent fashion for all of these theories then to be put to rest if they are all incorrect. Now, if they are correct, as Dewan there said, we may never actually know. They may never actually admit what actually happened there. Nevertheless, the pressure is finally being put on the Indians to release that sort of information and wait and see if that does occur in the coming days. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss Palestine. Now, a lot has happened regarding Palestine ever since those normalization of ties between Bahrain and Israel, as well as the UAE and Israel. It's come out that Palestine has not received any funds from Arab countries since March, thus suffering around a 50% loss in foreign aid, I should say, compared to 2019, and a 70% shortfall thereafter then in revenues. Now, Bahrain has said its normalization of ties with Israel, in fact, does further the two-state solution, even though, as all of us have read, the deals that have been signed, the agreement that has been signed between both sides, does not, in fact, make any mention of two states at all. And then we've also had then, on top of all of this, France, Egypt, Jordan, Germany jointly calling for the resumption of talks. I mean, is in this sort of atmosphere, is resuming talks really the best way to go, at least for the Palestinian side, which probably at this point in time feels quite sidelined in the entire process? You must remember that, of course, even the Middle East peace plan of Donald Trump did not even include the Palestinian Party at all in those negotiations to begin with. And then finally, we've also had Fatah and Hamas, this is some good news, coming to some sort of an understanding, as they've claimed many times, of course, over the past number of years, about new elections, which would be the first elections that would occur in 15 years. Those elections meant to happen in around 6 months' time or so. Now, let's discuss all of that a bit further. I join with Dr. Emile, Badarin, who is a research fellow at the European Neighborhood Policy Chair at the College of Europe. He's joining us today from Stockholm. Joining us from Florence is Dr. Matteo Capasso, who is a Max Weber Research Fellow at European University Institute. Matteo and Emile, thank you both for your time today. Emile, let me start with you. Let's start on top of the list, right? When it comes to the economic crisis for the Palestinian Authority. That seems to be a pressure tactic, quote unquote, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of course, to try to get the Palestinians in line possibly with the Middle East peace plan and with what's happening without even their direct involvement?
Thank you for having me here. Thanks for the invitation. This is an important question, an important topic. The economic crisis in Palestine is chronic. It's not the product of just the Trump deal. It's actually part of the entire Oslo package, the entire Oslo project, to keep the Palestinians on the edge. And actually, it's used, has been used time and again. And now with Trump, the pressure is, he's exerting more economic pressures on the Palestinians in order to allow some more political concessions. So that tactic has been used time and again with the Palestinians. So it's a chronic and a structural problem in order to manage the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinians as whole. Unfortunately, that's the situation that the Palestinians, the Palestinian leadership, the PLO, put itself into since basically the early 90s. So it is a tactic to pressure the Palestinians. But there is a good thing about it. I mean, it's the good thing about it is that it's just forcing the Palestinians to rethink their strategies. I mean, obviously, you can't build a state. The Palestinians come to the conclusion that you can't build a state, let alone a resistance movement, whatever you want it, popular or military or armed or whatever, on foreign aid. I mean, that doesn't work. And at the same time, you can't have a Palestinian political project, an independent Palestinian project that's based on funds from states and actors. And now we have the Gulf, obviously, supporting and sustaining the system that actually colonized the Palestinians. So you can't have it both ways. Right. That's the positive side. I see it as a way for the Palestinians to think and have a different strategy and a different political system. And that's what actually might be feeding into the both parties, that they are now coming together and hopefully will rebuild the Palestinian institutions and the political system.
Matteo, what are your thoughts on that? Because it seems, right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of course, again, but it seems that money has been used as a weapon, right, to almost keep the Palestinians in line or to divide them. I mean, you know, for whatever reason, in fact, it seems that aid has been used to weaken the Palestinians, right? I mean, to the extent that they haven't been able to, like I said, unite between Fatah, Hamas, etc., and they've been so reliant on foreign aid instead of trying to, you know, stand on their own 2 feet. What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks for having me, Waqar, and thanks for the question. Yes, I agree with Dr. Badarin when he refers to the Oslo Agreement. I mean, we need to obviously trace back this historically and see how basically Palestine and the Palestinian cause has been strangled by the Oslo agreements in this deadlock, because economically they are dependent on aid, while at the same time they need to satisfy and meet all the security demands of the Zionist entity. So, I mean, what happens is that what we're seeing now is, again, the alignment between the Arab conservative forces and the Zionist bloc in order to strangle the Palestinian cause. This has happened time and over and again. What we need to think as well is precisely, which connects also to your question about the money, Waqar, and I think is what is being normalized. What is being normalized, I think, is an alignment. It is an alignment between political elites and economic capital. So, because at the same time, we have been seeing how both in the UAE and Bahrain, immediately NGOs and civil society has replied, or they've set up institutions, you know, rejecting this normalization.
Indeed.
So, I mean, this once again proves that the Arab population is not completely unaware of the leadership, of their leadership. But at the same time, and here, you know, I would like also to bring in the US question and how important it is to understand what is happening here. Because, yes, Trump has been using the money card on so many levels. He did that with the World Health Organization, with NATO, and he's doing this, you know, now with the Palestinians. So, obviously, what we're seeing is the U.S. subcontracting the policing of the region to Israel and the Arab conservative forces. So while the U.S. is in decline, and we can see this, you know, while it's trying to face China, but it's incapable of. So, you know, at the same time, it's trying to rely on its own allies in the region. I don't think we are we're seeing this kind of equilibrium is going to, to sustain itself for long.
All right, let me add another conversation. We're now joined also by John Quigley, who is a President's Club Professor Emeritus of Law at Ohio State University. He's joining us this morning from Columbus, Ohio. John, good morning to you, and thank you for joining us here in Scope. What are your thoughts, John, about the U.S. role when it came to the normalization of ties going forward, even when we're talking about the Middle East peace plan, et cetera? It seems that in all of this, the consistent fact has remained that the Palestinians have been sidelined.
Yeah, the normalization ties with countries in the Gulf is a very negative development, but I don't think it is something that will necessarily impact negatively in the long term. I think that the efforts now at holding elections will be very beneficial and will put the Palestinians in a much better position.
But John, we have here before, right, where there have been attempts to unite the Palestinian parties, and for one reason or another, that has not happened. Do you think that this time around, that the reality on the ground will force this to happen? Because again, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but because it's been brought up so many times in the past, it just seems like we're unsure if this will actually happen.
Well, I mean, the Palestinians are in a very tight position now, and I think that will impel them in the direction of unity. I mean, the difficulties are very strong against their being together, and of course, the people in Gaza are likely to want to take actions by sending missiles into Israel in certain situations when Israel does something, and but I mean that in a way has kept the pressure on Israel. So to some extent, the Gaza authorities and the Ramallah authorities are actually working in tandem.
Emile, I wanted to bring you and ask you about, this call by France, Egypt, Jordan, and Germany jointly, who have called for the resumption of these talks towards a two-state solution. And I want to pick up on that notion of two states, right? As you well know, Emile, there are many, many people now talking about just a one-state solution because, again, of the realities on the ground. I mean, the Middle East peace plan as put forth was really hard to actually envision as something that would actually give Palestinians what they would be able to accept as two states. Do you think we're actually just heading towards one state, as hard fought as that might be?
Thank you for this question. I mean, the wording is pretty ironic. How many times you can revive the two-state solution or the peace process? I mean, we have heard this type of politics time and again. Has been calls European unions and different countries, even the US, about reviving this peace process and renewing the peace process and all of that stuff. The peace process and the two-state solution are empirically dead. There's no such a thing as two-state solution. It has been used as a cover ever since in order to enable the colonization of the West Bank and Gaza, and enable the colonization of the entire Palestine. So there's no such a thing empirically. If you look at the what's going on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza, there's no way that you can have a two-state solution. On top of that, you have even like the language of the Europeans, the European Union has changed. They talk about a two-state solution, not the two-state solution, and that's a major difference. Look at the Arab states that now normalize its relation with Israel. They actually openly accept the Trump deal. What's the Trump deal? There's no two-state solution in that one. There's no Jerusalem. There's no sovereign Palestinian state whatsoever. Israel has sovereignty over entire Palestine. And no one actually is speaking about the two-state solution anymore because it's long dead. The only one who speaks about the two-state solution is the current Palestinian leadership. I mean, the Oslo camp, which is the Palestinian Authority, that's the only one speaking about it. Where we are heading now, That's an important question. It's really hard to predict what's going on. I mean, what we have now, we have an apartheid one-state system on the ground. That's the empirical reality. Whether that is going to continue like this or even get even worse for the Palestinians, and it seems to be the trajectory is going to be worse on the ground, or it's going to be a democratic one state. It's hard to predict the future, but the reality, it's 100% is one state there. The Arabs seems to be, especially in the Gulf, they accept that reality. And let me remind you, if you look at the accords between the United Arab Emirates and Israel and the United States, it clearly speaks about suspending the suspension. Israel has accepted to suspend the declaration of its sovereignty over parts of the West Bank. It's only the declaration, but empirically, the entire West Bank is annexed anyway. And also, I would like to remind you of the article by the United Arab Emirates ambassador in Washington. He wrote an article in the Ahronot in the Israeli newspaper in June this year, and he was speaking openly that they are seeking a wider or a greater autonomy for the Palestinians. So there's no such a thing as a two-state solution. It's a cover, has been used and overused, and I think now it's no longer working, I would say.
Matteo, what are your thoughts on that, two states versus one state? Because it's really hard to envision all of this being able to be forced onto the Palestinians, right? I mean, that's the one thing that has been, that's shocked me throughout this entire process when it comes to the, the Middle East plan as well, the peace plan, that is that there simply wasn't any Palestinian involvement. So if you're not even involving one of the major parties to this entire issue, it's really hard to envision how you can force this onto them at this time.
Yes, I think Emile has provided a very good picture to describe what the current situation. I mean, we are in a deadlock. What is being forced on Palestinians is not just a solution, but bombs, rockets, and this strangling of the situation of the Palestinians. So, I mean, while I would tend to agree that we are an apartheid state at the moment, but I think what we might be heading to is more and more a situation of Indian native reservations, where Palestinians are literally encircled by settlements. That's the only thing that is happening on the ground. Empirically, it is true, the two-state solution is not going anywhere. Then we have to talk about the hypocrisy of the European states, which they don't want to, they don't want to make the linkages between the systemic laws passed in France, in Germany against BDS and, silencing support for Palestine, while then, at the diplomatic level, they come out and ask and call for a two-state solution. I mean, just in the past, I think in the past year in France, only 10% of the Jewish community has emigrated to Israel. This is, or without talking about the arms deals that Italy, France, and Germany are doing with Israel, there is absolutely no way that, these calls are serious. Yes, it's just, it's a deadlock. They're stuck. And let us not forget that Europe is this deadlock in which the European states are diplomatically. We can see this happening in Libya as well, or in many other countries, and it's related inevitably to a progressive decline of Western power in the world.
John, what are your thoughts about, again, two states versus one state, and what international law can do all of this in resolving this, right? Because we have the Oslo Accords, and that didn't really result in what it was meant to result in. We've had even the Arab Peace Initiative put forth that wasn't really signed on to or agreed upon with the Israelis. We've had this Middle East peace plan, but again, without the Palestinian involvement. I mean, there have been attempts here, and even, one agreement at least signed, but it hasn't resulted on anything actually really changing on the ground to a very significant extent towards a two-state solution. Do you think it's time for the international community to accept that this will be a one-state solution?
Well, no, I think it's probably better if the international community continues to try to work towards the two-state solution. I mean, it could be that after a Palestine state really comes into operation, that there could be a merger with Israel. But I think the international community is not really in a good position to move towards support for a single state as long as it's not clear that that's what is desired on the Palestinian side. And the support has been quite strong for a Palestine state in the Security Council. I was at the Security Council a year ago testifying about the settlements, and I was struck by the fact that the members of the Security Council, with the exception of the United States, were very strong in their condemnation of the settlements and in their support for a two-state solution. So I think the Palestinians would be giving up quite a lot if they diverged from the two-state solution. They would be a minority group, essentially, at the international level. They would not be a state at the international level, and they would not have a real voice.
Okay, we'll leave there no word as the clock has gotten the best of us. We do sincerely appreciate all three of our esteemed guests. John, they're speaking to us from Columbus, Ohio. Emile was speaking to us from Stockholm, and Matteo was speaking to us today from Florence. They put into context for us, right, this current situation when it comes to Palestine. Of course, we can talk about the normalization of ties between the Bahrainis and Israelis as well as the Emiratis and Israelis, but how much does that affect Palestinians themselves? How much does that affect, in fact, the reality of a two states versus a one-state solution? That's something that is up for debate, as we saw amongst our guests and their differing opinions on that issue. Because at this point in time, right, the consistent message here is that the Palestinians are sidelined, and the Palestinians, if they do unite, and of course that's a huge if right now because that has been spoken of many times in the past, and of course one would hope that they are able to unite to be able to strengthen at least their position, because it doesn't make sense for you to have a negotiating position which is weak. You need to have two negotiators or two parties negotiating who are at a fairly similar level of strength to be able to then come to a just solution for both sides. That needs to happen for any negotiation, any solution that is then agreed upon to actually work for both sides permanently. I'll be back with my final segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, in this segment, we're going to discuss something that's been spoken of a number of times in the United States, and that is the viability and workability of the Electoral College versus essentially a direct vote, a popular vote, to bring in any respective president into the White House. Now, this has been debated a number of elections in the past as well, but it really gained steam, I think, possibly around the George W. Bush time and Al Gore time, and also then, of course, Trump versus Clinton back in 2016, because Clinton did, to be fair to her, win the popular vote. However, Donald Trump still came out on top because of the Electoral College votes. Now, a new poll by Gallup has shown that 61% of Americans actually do want to amend the Constitution to replace the Electoral College with a popular vote system altogether. Now, the possibility of that happening is quite slim because we probably would not have states and enough, lawmakers voting on that to happen. Nevertheless, it shows, the sentiments of the American people at this time vis-a-vis that. Democrats, to be completely fair, in this poll are significantly higher in favor of a popular vote than Republicans, who are much, much lower in the percentage. And then that again goes to show the polarization in the U.S. right now on such issues. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Dr. Brianna and Mack, who is an assistant professor of politics and government at Ohio Wesleyan University. She's joining us this morning from Delaware, Ohio. Brianna, good morning to you, and thank you for joining us here in Scope. What do you make of this? I mean, the Electoral College versus popular vote, I know, has been something that's been spoken of a number of times. What's your opinion on that? Where do you lie on this issue?
Well, yes, I agree with you that this is a reoccurring topic. I think that, so where I am personally is that, so the purpose of the Electoral College was to protect voters in smaller states as well as protect voters in larger states. So the Electoral College, the number of votes each state has is determined by the number of House seats each state has, as well as the number of senators. And so each state has 2 senators. So the remaining part is, determined based on the number of House seats that they have. And so if we break away from that system and then go to a fully popular vote system and do a winner take all, the concern would then be in cases when there is just, in cases where the popular vote elects a candidate that is perhaps too popular or not really fit for the job. So that was the whole purpose of the Electoral College, to prevent instances in which a completely unprepared person, completely unqualified, ends up becoming elected.
And I imagine, right, as I said in my intro, the Clinton versus Trump, that vote in 2016 really has brought more steam to this issue at this time. Is this simply, as the Republicans would probably say, just Democrats who have sour grapes and are just angry that their candidate lost because even though she won the popular vote, she lost the Electoral College? Is it as simple an explanation as that?
Well, I don't think so. Not necessarily just a political party argument. So the issue is under the Electoral College, one would argue that individuals that live in individuals that live in larger states like California and Texas and New York, Florida, their votes matter less than those who live in smaller states like Nebraska, Delaware, Rhode Island. And it's not necessarily the case, because what would happen under a popular vote system would be that those individuals that live in those smaller states, their votes could arguably be discounted. However, when we're thinking about popular vote, there are so many different types of models that could be used. So, for example, not all of the states determine their Electoral College votes by the popular vote. Instead, I want to say Nebraska and Maine, they use a form of a proportional distribution. So the person who wins the popular vote receives 1 vote, and then they receive another vote based on how each congressional district in that state voted. So if majority of the individuals in one congressional district voted for Trump, then Trump would then receive the vote the vote belonging to that congressional district. Other models for popular vote, besides it just being winner take all, another proportional vote distribution would be that the proportion of the votes would be distributed on how much of the popular vote each candidate received. So instead of in California, a winner take all, instead if Clinton received 60% of the popular vote, she would have received 60% of the Electoral College votes. And then, of course, Trump would have received the 40%.
All right. So as a comment then, Brianna, what I get from this is that, and you've of course heard this talk about going into these elections from both sides, in fact, but more from Donald Trump about accepting or not whatever results may come out. I mean, if he loses, especially, he said he may not accept those results and there would be a Supreme Court fight. But it just seems that what we continue to prove almost is just polarization within U.S. politics, right? Is that what you see as well? And then will these elections be, as much as they're meant to be decisive, will actually be very indecisive for the country and will continue to just create more divisions?
Well, we actually had this conversation in one of my classes with my students yesterday. I was asking them what they thought, what does this mean for our understanding of our American democracy? And one of the students was quick to remind me that the president had released a statement within the last 24 hours that said, I had never explicitly said that I would not peacefully transition. That was something that the opposite party, that was something Joe Biden had said. And I was like, okay, but, I heard that before. No, the issues that are going on within politics in America, it will not be resolved after this election. I believe the nation still has a long uphill battle. I think ultimately voters need to wake up and realize that what's going on with these, upper level party politics is preventing the government from doing its job. And that's, of course, providing goods and services and effectively representing the interests of the people.
All right, Brianna, we're at that, but we do sincerely appreciate you taking your time out of a busy schedule for us this Saturday morning. That was Brianna speaking to us from Delaware, Ohio, sharing her expertise on American politics, specifically about the electoral college versus popular vote debate, which has, again, been happening for many years. And she laid out for us, a number of possible scenarios of a popular vote, which would not necessarily mean a direct vote that winner takes all, because, again, there was a reason why the electoral college was brought into existence, to ensure some sort of equality and equity in different states, the larger ones versus the smaller ones, vis-a-vis population especially. Will this work? I mean, obviously, at this point in time, it seems very slim likelihood that this would in fact pass by lawmakers. Nevertheless, it's something that needs to be resolved, especially, of course, considering we're having such divisive politics in the United States at this time. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.